Would you care to note tonight that contrary to ordinary belief, life does not ordinarily provide any means, any needs, any vehicle to make radical inquiries, notwithstanding the fact that life continues to rename the water diet, as it were, to continually rename religions, philosophies, common sense, on the basis, nowadays it comes out of psychology very often, and politics. But you hear this stated, that someone representing either themselves or institutions say, I am here, either in my personal capacity or I am here representing a collective effort, an institution. I am here to ask the hard questions. Now, you've all heard that if you're sitting around doing nothing better than watching TV or reading the paper. Someone's always saying that. And very often it is someone in the city of some consequence. There seems to be some secondary importance to the person. And they say, we have got to face hard questions. And they may talk about the national deficit, that we're all going to be going down the financial drain pipe, that we're going to ruin the environment, that we're all driving ourselves and the next generation crazy through being materialistic or through being not materialistic enough. Would you care to note that those are not hard questions? Those are not new questions. All you've got to do is go back and look at European Lit, Philosophy 101, read the Bible. They are not new questions, and they sure as hell are not hard questions. And if that did not seem to be specific enough into man's internal workings, if they got really metaphysical, as I think they're still pleased to call it, they might want to ask such questions as, just as the real questions, the hard questions. Won't they ask such things as, which is the real God? Why is there evil in the world if most of us are decent folk? Those are not hard questions. They are not radical inquiries, that is, to the basis of what might be going on here. It is left to stuff like this. It is left to this kind of stuff that such inquiries are made. And of course they're not made on a widely acknowledged public level. The fact is, without having to look at other individuals, without you having to look at institutions, all you've got to do is look at the memory of your own DNA, look at your own nervous system, look at your own brain if you are at least partially qualified to be involved with this kind of stuff. I do not care to try and go into what qualified means because, as you and I know, we have no idea what that means. But even if you're partially qualified to be involved and be interested in this, it is only such people who have the means, have the needs, and perhaps have any sort of potential vehicle to make these inquiries, which might also lead you to see why this is always so downright popular. In line with what we've been talking about, would you also care to note that the ordinary attempts to ask the hard questions, and for you people who might be hearing this on tape, if this tape is seen some other time in some other place, the particular examples I picked out had nothing to do with any sort of random or specific attack on politics, economics, or religion. It is simply the basis that people ordinarily are led to believe, those who might verbalize such a thing, that there are important questions in life and that they either are qualified or driven to ask them, or else they are so wired up as to be specifically interested in other people who may say, it's time that we face the hard questions. And many, 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 many people. And they do not have to be recipients of any undergraduate degree in philosophy, but many people will hearken, if people still hearken. They will hearken and go, yes, And maybe I don't like it. Maybe I prefer to be having a beer and minding my own business. But suddenly there it is, a break. The game is temporarily called because of rain, and suddenly here comes somebody, a minister or a politician, says, well, it's time for us to face the hard questions. And many people just standing around might go, well, that's true. I don't want to hear it, and I don't have time for this. But that's no doubt about it, because that is the way humanity is wired up. But rather than being involved with someone, in this case, me, saying that the questions are not really hard and they're not new, look at it another way. What it amounts to, rather than the questions, is what it amounts to, that all the attempts to ponder and ask the hard questions amount to one thing and one thing only. It's an unrecognized attempt, again, to turn processes into things specific. That's what all the questions are about. Anytime they ask a question, why do bad things happen to good people? I was about to give the real version, but that's not the one that made the bestseller list last year, is it? No, it's not. I guess that rabbi would have been ashamed of me if I'd done the real title. But the book title was, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. That is not a radical question. It is not even a question. If your intelligence can expand to the point of seeing what we've been talking about, it is, as always, the attempt to turn processes, that is, the unspecified process of being alive, into something specific. They have got to thingamatize it for it to have any validity in the secondary world. So it is not even, on its own basis, an inquiry of some sort. It can be certainly called that, and if the sentence ends with a question mark, who am I to say it's not an inquiry? But that is not what it's about. The so-called attempted inquiry, the question, is itself an attempt to take the processes of life and to turn them into things specific. Now, if there was anything resembling verbally a radical question, a hard question, it would be more along these kind of lines. It would be more like, why does everything that exists exist with opposition? Why is it not possible for that, by all accounts, by most accounts, by my account, why do those things that do exist, that have some beneficial aspect to them, things that are per se salubrious to the life of man, why do not even the most simplistic, direct, good things in life, why can they not exist, period? Why can they not exist in and by themselves without opposition? But no one asks that question. Not because they're dumb. The nervous system is not wired up in such a way. The nervous system is not wired up in such a way to even ask a more childish version of that question, which would be, why does everything have an opposite? Or, why is it that everything in life exists in pairs? Why? Not why waiting for an answer, which would be turning a process into things specific, but if I may suggest what the term we used before, closer to twee. To what end could it be possibly that things are, that is all things, exist in duplicate? Why is it that everything of which we can think about, of which we can perceive, exists in a dichotomous structure? And as always, there's no sense in us trying to belabor the point that we are, or that I am saying, making some comment that the whole world is blind to and that they should wake up to it. They can't. But once you see that there is even a modicum of potential benefit there, then your kind of question should be even closer to, well, why is it that I couldn't even think of that? Why is it that no one thinks to ask that? Not just, well, I hear what you're saying and it makes reasonable verbal sense, but nobody asks that question. None of the great philosophers. Why should I worry about it? I hear what you say, but about the time you hear it, if you're operating at just the old level of hardwired intelligence, all you want to do is just kind of look away and wonder what time it is, or it sure is hot in here. It just seems to lead nowhere. And the reason is, playing with reality now, three-dimensional reality, the reason is, if ordinary intelligence could pursue that any further, what would happen would be like an episode of life, like your 30-minute expected episode of whatever it is, or an hour's worth of Dallas comes on, and the son of a bitch doesn't ever stop. It gets to be the end of the hour, and you want to go to the bathroom or go to bed or hoping something better would come on, and it keeps going. That is, the processes of life did not get turned into something specific. That is, the sentence seemed to have no end. You thought, well, all right, da 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 da. That assuming you had some sense of rhythm, da 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 da, and you waited for, the bass drum kick or the final roll of the drummer, and that's the end of the tune. And there would never be an end of a tune. That is what I was suggesting you would come closest to qualifying as hard questions. Radical inquiries would be the inquiries not only going against directly the city grain, the way that the intellect is primed and wired up, not only going against the grain of not letting processes turn into things specific, not only not doing that, but attempting to drive them on into new neural areas. And that is what would, may I say, we certainly can stretch the plays on words, since I said drive it. This is the sort of thing that might buffalo the ordinary intellect, because you're attempting to drive an inquiry. That is, you're attempting to take the energy running through the nervous system at this end that seems to be going somewhere. A hard question, something that always concerns me in life, and it seems to be going in you, and if you could in some way take the old intellect and make it do this, to stop it from stopping. Since we're already playing Wild West with driving buffalo, how about this? Everybody remembers the good old scene where the smart-aleck, bucolic, rough guys make the young dude tap dance. When he says tap dance, and the guy says, I can't. And they suddenly take a couple of shots at his feet. And he says to the piano player, do a little bye-bye blackbird. And suddenly the guy has developed a new talent. That is sort of what you would be doing with the old intellect. It wants to stop. There apparently is at least some potential stopping place to this inquiry, and it's going to stop there, and you don't let it stop. That would be a radical inquiry. That would be a hard question. And now would you care to expand even your own definition of what a hard question would be? Because as we started this, you assumed that I was going to play with it in some way, but how about a hard question? Could we now give it a new definition? A hard question is one that you refuse to answer. A hard question is one that you refuse to take any available answer thereto. You would, because any answer is taking the processes of life, whatever it was that seemed to be the focus of your investigation. You are taking the processes of life, which would be non-episodic, the universality of life, and you're turning into a local phenomenon, which must be named. That is what we've been calling the secondary world. You make it a thing specific. You put what appears to be at least a workable ending to that episode, a period, some kind, well, let's say a period, to that sentence. But a radical inquiry would be that which you would not allow to come to any, even apparent, conclusion. May I point out to you again, hence the historic popularity of this kind of stuff. Because once anybody gets any idea, assuming anybody could get any idea just walking off the street of what this was, they just immediately think, man, this is just what I've been looking for. About the best you can say is I still like some of the inquiries that I receive from these tapes being shown at other places is people, and they do their best. It's not any sort of fun being poked at them, but they do their best. By God, I've seen a few of these tapes, and I think I want to see some more, but first off, would you tell me exactly what this is about? Or there's another version that says, exactly what is it? What is the system that you're presenting? Which that one is, like most of them, is impossible to respond to in any worthwhile way, except sometimes I get tempted to say, well, the only thing resembling a system, if indeed you are really interested and that you plan to come back and see those tapes, the closest thing resembling a system is already worked on you, or you wouldn't be coming back. Other than that, I got nothing to tell you. There is no system. It's just what it is. May I say it a third time? Thus is the basis of just the almost irrepressible popularity of this throughout history. Speaking of popularity, here should be a reasonable place to give you another piece of a edge of a map. All of the popular, and that is historically apparently significant, I don't mean popular now in any pejorative sense, I mean those things in history that seem to have had a hand going through the air. No, that seem to have had some real significance. That is really popular. Now I include such things as Christianity, the Roman Empire, philosophy, ideas of goodness, love. There is an aspect to all popular and apparently meaningful. That is, history has remembered them in some way. Ideas. And when I say ideas, make it no. I'll give you more examples of the same, but take it in the widest possible connotation of ideas. But all popular ideas, let me give you the working premise, first, is all popular ideas always appeal to hometown sentiments. There is no recognition of this possible with ordinary intellect, thus it never comes up for any inquiry. But an idea cannot be popular unless it plays to the hometown crowd, unless it has a direct appeal to the townies. And it goes, we don't need many examples if you're going to hear it at all. Pick up any book, peruse your own quick recollection of anything you read in college or recently. It goes on today. It's not just erstwhile activities, but going on today. There will be a statement made. Let's start in times past. You read something some philosopher at the time, some historian, will point out something going on during the heyday of that glorious empire, perhaps. And they'll be mentioning the ways in which they lived and the gods they believed in, etc. And the end of the paragraph will be, thus have us Romans always believed. And let's assume that we're pushing you back 200 BC, and you are a Roman, and you're thinking about this, or you have a certain kind of intrigue into history, and you read something like that. And it seems to have a more collective effect, more importance than simply a few words strung out on a page. Or if you were there in person, if you heard a speaker stand up there in the Senate and go blah, 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 thus do not all of us Romans believe. And let's assume it was a pretty mainstream statement. That is, it's going to be something that is popular, that's going to play in Italy at that time. And he makes a statement, and the crowd more or less goes, right on. It must play to hometown sentiments. And it goes, if you're going to follow this, I repeat, I'm going to give you just a couple if you can't see it. Quotes. I'm just making up the quotes now. To wrap up whole epochs of history. A quick little submarine sandwich of all these different pieces that made up certain ideas. All right. Quote, sick. Quote, sick. Thus could no good Christian fail to recognize. End of quote. Quote, sick. It couldn't be clearer to any educated, liberal thinking man or woman. Unquote. Or those of you that understand how life works, it's nowadays normally left to what's called showbiz. If somebody started off And you can end the act, but they take the ending and start it off and say, comedians especially. It's great to be here tonight. I just got in from be here in Los Angeles. I was playing last night down in San Diego. Is anybody San Diego? Yay! You don't understand that? Laugh loves a cheap laugh. Laugh loves it. You get the response of the hometown sentiments already. Did I make it too obscure? All right. Boy, it's great to be here in Los Angeles. How many of you are from, and of course he's in downtown Los Angeles. Is anybody here actually from Los Angeles? Yay! All right, if you don't understand that, it's these good sawdust preachers. If they're still left, they want to start out and they come out and they, the opening act, they get through and they bring on the star of the night instead of a comedian. No, it's a guy with a Bible, and he comes out and he says, "I'm proud to be here tonight. Everybody that's here to praise the Lord, is everybody here to have a good time? Hey!" You don't understand that. It's when you don't have a reputation. If it's going to be Sinatra show up and deliver the sermon that night, you don't have to go through that. You don't even need much of a warm-up act. You just say, and here he is, Mr. Sinatra. And he comes out, and he's already pre-sold. But the cheap laugh, what I was referring to, is I simply turned it inside out instead of wrapping it up, such as, well, what real Muslim could fail to understand the righteousness of our position? That would seem to wrap up the sentiments of some kind, but the sentiments, that is a popular idea, even if the idea seems to be encased in a complete philosophy, in a complete systematic presentation of something, for it to be popular, for it to be meaningful, it has got to be directed at hometown sentiments. Who else is going to applaud a statement? Now, by statement, all we're doing now is talking about a thing specific over a whole process. I'm wrapping up. Let's go back to Christianity for a second, just an easy example. 2,500 years of that stuff. And wrap it up right now, somebody make a statement about the way we should treat one another, and to say, when assuming that you're addressing, that we're in an area that you could safely assume, that is, life would assume already, that the majority of the crowd are indeed at least titular Christians. And so the person says, that is, some part of life's body says to another part of life's body, blah, 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 about the way we should do, because I humbly suggest to you, how could any right-thinking Christian fail to agree to this? In the hometown, that is, Christians in this case, there is a transfer of energy that life needed, it was expected, but for it to be popular, that is, for the transformation, for the translation, to take processes and right then at that moment to turn them into things specific. To get this, which is a form of energy also, but to get that, you have got to play to the hometown sentiments. When you play to hometown sentiments, there is no such thing as fresh information. You do not walk out before the game at Wrigley Field and holler, "I'm here to say, I'm here to pay tribute to all of our favorites, the Mets." Hardly. None of the Caesars, even I suggest to you, even the ones that were even balmier than some of the others, would not have walked out in the Coliseum and say, "Wait a minute, I'm here to say a few good words for the Christians." They would have probably had an immediate recount of the votes, if indeed the Caesars had ever been so cheap as to subject themselves to the voters' whimsies. To expand what I was hoping you'd do on your own of ideas, all of man's ideas, all of man's religions, all of man's arts, all of man's books, his literatures, all of what appears to be movements of all kinds, and what's really good, that I don't guess we need to really go into, make it parenthetical, or hyphenated, even the histories that man has. Because all of you should be good enough to know that history doesn't exist. History is something you have. And histories vary from locale to locale. But the histories that men have, the groups have, the histories must be directed in playing to hometown sentiments, or they don't make history. They're at best cheap brutes, canards, unproven allegations. Just think, well, at the very most, just impertinent bits and pieces. Because if it's going to be history, if it's going to be history in Chi-Town, it's got to be about the White Sox or the Cubs. The history of the Mets, that's not history. But I was also going to expand when I say that all the ideas, all the religions, all the movements, all the political theories, all the economic schools of thought, all the philosophies, all the books, all the paintings, all the statues, if they are to be popular, they have got to be playing to the hometown sentiments, and thus even history, thus even religion, thus even everything is provincial, is parochial, is chauvinistic, and it is, in the widest possible sense, always prejudicially local. This kind of stuff is the only example of that which is not. And if it is, then it's not this. And I don't mean this in some way existing like on this tape or us meeting here. If you now attempt to make radical inquiries on your own, and the radical inquiries in any way, if you can use what we're talking about tonight, that you begin to see that even what you consider to be some sort of cold-blooded, clinical, more objective, fresh inquiries into the nature of why things are arranged as they are, if you can see that the inquiry that you now find to be popular, you take it as being important. You take it as being something that you're living with now that you keep trying to think, well, why is so-and-so? If it has become popular with you, it's playing to some kind of hometown sentiment in you. That is, in some way that you have yet to notice, and I don't mean it takes some kind of lifetime, all you got to do is turn around and look at it. If it is playing to you on a popular basis, it is chauvinistic, it is provincial, it is parochial, and it is, lastly, overall, it is prejudicially local. That is, it's not going to take you anywhere. It is going to, in some way, draw up processes into a thing specific. We mentioned, using we and the royal regal prerogative, so that you people don't sound so egotistical. See, I go ahead and include us all. Since we mentioned institutionally earlier, when there are these statements that are playing directly to hometown sentiments that do have a sense that not many of you felt as though you got any grasp on, such as what true Buddhist could fail to agree with our position? What right-thinking 20th century man or woman could disagree with the salient features of my message? These are like institutional attempts to tell what kind of guy the city is. That is, some segment of the city, some large numbers of so-called, I think as some people are pleased to call them, people. That is, if someone says, what Roman could disagree with my position? Then the same number of Romans that heard that speech or saw it later that night on TV, which I know is hard to fathom, but those who listened and went, hey, those who did that, they were part of a collective process without understanding it of an institution. That is, a collective telling of what kind of guy we are. And if you are telling what kind of guy you are, you're not asking a question. If you're saying, well, I'm the kind of guy that agrees with the truth. That would be the proper response, would it not, to these kind of popular, hometown-directed questions as to who could disagree with the all-encompassing validity of the Ten Commandments or with the Marxist theory. Everyone who responded are not making an inquiry. They are not asking hard questions. They have joined in the collective process that somebody started. It was like one guy jumps up and says, "Hey, let's dance." And then X amount of thousands of people. All the Romans within earshot of the guy who made the speech. All Brits within the earshot of somebody who jumps up and makes some kind of clarion call back to the real Marxism. Whatever it is, everybody that goes, "Hey." It's like one guy jumped up and says, "Let's dance." And then X amount of thousands of people jumped up and says, "We are prepared to go backwards. We've been waiting on you." And it's as though they all embrace each other, which is a collection of life's own cellular processes via man, of trying to say collectively, this is the kind of guys we are. We are neo-Marxists, or we are the original Marxists, not brothers, or Carl suffered enough of those kind of cheap jokes. Well, I assume he has. I'm just assuming. At least he's never talked about you like that, so give the guy a break. All of these collective attempts to tell what kind of guy we are serving purposes in life. It is another way to look, by the way, at all of the religions, to look at the city-states. That is a continuing difference. Lines drawn that here is Germany and here is France, or here's lines drawn of here's West Beirut, there's the Christians, and here's the East Beirut, which is the Muslims of the different stripes. To draw out all of these boundaries is always an attempt to turn processes into things specific. And they have got to be things specific, the way life is still arranged right now, for the secondary world, for the civilized world, for that world which seems to progress through man, for it to exist. All of the ideas about one world government, one language, and etc. is still life. Is still life speculating. It's been going on a long time, but notice, it shifts. Borders are shifting. It's of no great importance, but those of you that keep up with the news at all, you're seeing it's of no importance. But here it is, circle on the tape. Middle of 1990, you're seeing the kind of breakups in Europe right now. I guess the last time was downfall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a shifting of what seems to be hard-rooted, deep-seated political alliances. The boundaries haven't really changed in nations right now, but notice this, the question arose and scared the hell out of some people, especially since the Germans seem to be the one who brought it up. Because, as you know, anytime you Germans bring up any question about somebody's boundaries, it makes, if they just bring it up like theoretically, the Germans just say to the world in general, or just nobody, they just kind of look around over just generally Europe and say, does anybody remember that the boundaries, no matter where they point to, like the boundaries down around some of the Balkan states were not what they were 200 years ago. They just like speculation. And suddenly, at any rate, the kind of alliances, the kinds of boundaries, the kind of apparent allegiances that people play to some almost do or die degree to religions and our political philosophies weaken, they strengthen, they seem to shift, but notice this, they're always there. And why? Why, regardless of the fact that even parts of an ordinary man's nervous system, you might take someone who was a fairly well-established, hardwired political junkie of some kind, and if you said, wouldn't you agree that if in some way we could do away with all nationalistic boundaries, just don't argue, just think a minute, would that not be a much more potential for humanity living in peace if they were not fighting over the damn boundaries between your yard and my yard? You might get some good old hard-rocked royalist or Whig or right-winger somewhere in the world to go, well, yeah. Of course, it'd be, well, yeah, common. They couldn't really go along with it. That's why life split up, which nobody asked. Why is life split up like that? You had your chance to ask that. Don't bother me with that. No one can really conceive of it because it is now not yet is not any part of life's really makeup in man, because if you did away with boundaries, there would be no way for the secondary world to be turned into things specific enough. You could not identify opposition. You could not identify that which you do not want to be. If there were not boundaries, the French could not say, well, at least thank God we're not Germans. Or the Germans with no boundaries could say, well, at least thank God we're not Polish. Or the Poles say, well, at least thank God across that line, at least we're not Russians. And it goes on and on and on, which is no consequence. If it wasn't that, it'd just be your hometown sentiment, Chicago against New York, and it's all irrelevant to a revolutionist. There must be those kinds of boundaries, though. Where I was trying to get you to consider the fact that all of this, although it seems to have some, to ordinary minds, some greater historical significance, or that there's something more important than you feeling like that you're mad at somebody of a different economic position, of somebody of a different political stripe, even in your hometown, that you feel like that there is a difference at the ordinary level between that and the kinds of greater international tensions that might be going on between the Arab world and Israel, between India, the Hindu India, and the Islamic India. You can say, well, now that's a different thing than me arguing with my neighbor over politics, over whether Republicans are... No. It's not. Not at all. And this is not symbolic. And absolutely forget metaphorical. It is a collective telling of what kind of guy a group is. And anybody that agrees with it is playing along. Oh, and anybody that disagrees with it is playing along. That's for those of you keeping score. Right now it's the world 7, Chicago 7. That was the latest. By telling what kind of guy collectively some group is, that is institutions, churches, nationalities, countries, races, religions, professions, etc., etc. They are all, by doing this, defending themselves. And not in some psychological sense, although that would be true. But that is not the basis of it. That is the verbal clothing of it. The energy behind it is something else. But by any institution, city, nation, race, state, religion, collective effort, by them telling what kind of guy they are, which they are telling what kind of guy they are as often as you are individually at the ordinary level, but every time they're telling what kind of guy they are, such as, what decent, intelligent Roman could possibly disagree with what I've just said? And of course, everyone that wants to dance that dance, that is, anybody that wants to be considered to be a reasonable, intelligent, right-thinking Roman. Of course, you might glance around to make sure that most of the people in your crowd are going to nod before you nod. But of course, they're looking at you too. But at any rate, the dance goes on. They get that tango going, and get the accordion player get his fingers warmed up, and you might have thought, I don't want to dance. And next thing you know, you're with some big old tall, dark-haired guy with his hair slicked back. And you think you're dancing with somebody, and you're dancing with an institution. You're dancing with a collective statement of, I'll tell you the kind of guys we are. Us Argentines don't take any crap. And there you are dancing along, and you're not an Argentine. Plus you're a man, and you're dancing with this guy with his hair, and you're not even wired up that way. It doesn't matter. You are agreeing, even if you say, I don't want to do this, which is the same thing as some of you laugh, so that you'll notice. Even if you agree to dance, or even if you say, I wouldn't dance like that if somebody killed me, you're still part of the dance. You're still a part of the ballroom. But institutionally, collectively, for any race, religion, nationality, institution, profession, anything other than a person, is what we've been calling institutions. Any statement they make as to what kind of guy they are. It is a form, where we were, I want you to try and get a glimpse, it's not psychological, that's just childish. It is a form of defending their position, but for the sake of not troubling individuals to do so. So close to the holidays, I guess I was foolishly hoping I'd get a better response than that. It's not that hard to see. Even ordinary people will talk about psychologically. There's safety in numbers. How about that? People on the playground know that. If you're picked on all the time, you run over and you find out some bunch of kids that's been picking on somebody else. You go join them, try to hide out, try to blend in. That form of defense is not unknown, but it is not ever. No one can ask. No one can make a kind of radical inquiry beyond why do people want to agree with the majority. And you could say, which I'm sure it's said somewhere in psychological circles, well, that's a sign of the old herding instinct with social animals, which somewhere in our reptilian or mammal background, we're still herd animals. Or it could be someone trying to say psychologically, well, no one wants to stick out. Or people, many people, they might say, under the pressures of contemporary life, no longer feel that they have such a strong individual ego, and therefore they will bend to the will of the crowd. They can say all that, and it's true enough. But the question should be, to what end? Why is life arranged in such a way? And why is it no one notices that none of that explains anything? It seems to be the finish of a sentence to say, well, why do I want to agree with the crowd? Why will I not say I don't agree to that? And someone says, well, psychologically it is considered to be a sign of reasonable health if, assuming the crowd itself is not a mob. If the crowd itself is reasonable for you to go along, it's not unreasonable. Oh, okay. What does that say? It's saying that 2 plus 2 is 2 plus 2. The defense that all institutions make, that collectively the defense that's always made by a crowd, by a collection of life's cellular structures known as men and women, this kind of collective stating of what kind of guy I am is a defense that is done in advance so as to not to trouble the individual with such foolish, and may I add, useless attempts. If you spread around the uselessness, it's not so much a burden on the individual. I don't know whether I should say that that was a certain kind of joke. I didn't know it was actually going to be that funny to three-dimensional existence, but that was a funny. Not that it wasn't true, but that is a joke. There's another aspect I was hoping to drag your attention to in the last few times we were taping, having to do with cutting up the secondary world via the process of taking processes and making them into things specific. If in some way we could speak of just the primary world instead of the secondary world where this exists, if we were still talking about just the world wherein people exist on a barely physically supportive level, if we were speaking of that primary world, which would be a world of nothing but processes, there'd be no thing specific. In that world, even if we jumped in and looked at a time wherein things did not, let us say, seem to be going very well with you, that there you stand and there is no immediate possibility of food or sex, or you're there and it's beginning to look very, very potentially inclement weather, and you look around and there is no place to shelter yourself. So in the primary world, a world of processes instead of things specific, you could be in a position where things do not seem, without any doubt, to be going very well for you right then. Okay? Okay. If we were talking about the primary world, do you understand, at that level, under those conditions, if it was just the primary world of processes, there still wouldn't be anything to say. So here we go again now. All right. Even if things didn't seem to be okay, if you were still just in the world of processes, there wouldn't be anything to say about it. Well, thank goodness we're about to run out of time, so I don't have to try and drag you through this. So we'll have to jump real crudely. If, playing with reality, if we could take you and you could carry back in this little make-believe scenario, you could still carry with you your ordinary consciousness, and yet you are now in some way mythologically taken back, if we're going to talk about horizontal time, taken back to where you are living in the primary world. You're living on that basis. It is a mute existence, and yet you're conscious of this. You got me? Like a cartoon or a fishback in a movie. Flashback then. But there it is, or Peter Pan, or somebody died and your spirit comes back. You got me? That there you are, and you can go back and you can see you living this existence. And we see you. There you are floating around up here and you're watching this. And there you are, a mute you in a primary world where things are not thing specific, where it is a non-ending process. And there you are, and you look down and you can tell through your mystical abilities, since you can float and see all this, you can tell that that primary you is hungry, horny, getting cold. Things do not seem to be going well at all. And yet if you looked at that primary you, and things are not okay, at that level, in the world of processes, there still wouldn't be anything to say. Oh, we can get real crude. I guess some of you see it, you just perhaps need more time to think about it. Although it's not a perfect parallel, of course. You cannot conceive of an animal, the highest mammals that seem to be your native relatives on this planet. You cannot imagine, can you, an orangutan, a chimpanzee, a dog-faced baboon. Let's don't go into those. But of having anything to say, it could be starving to death. It could be hornying to death. But can you imagine an animal having anything to say? Now, not just the fact that they don't talk, but think about it. You can't think long. You either see it or you don't. At the primary level, they're still operating on within a dichotomous paradigm, like do or die, is what it amounts to. But if it was on the basis of non-stop, undiagnosed, undivided processes, there would be nothing to say even were you faced with death or upcoming death, almost certain death. In other words, things are not all right. There would still be nothing to say. You have got to have the secondary world. You have got to have the intellect operating. You have got to have a secondary world to ever have anything to gripe about. It's that simple. I say it's that simple, then would you consider where that leaves all human complaints? Not trying to prove that just what I said is correct, but if you can glimpse, it's nothing to be proven, if you can glimpse the validity of the fact that beyond, if you want to look at it, back, before, or below, which are just spurious spatial directions, but if you tried to consider what would be human life prior to the intellect being ignited, still have to eat, still have to procreate, still have to keep my body within certain limits to survive vis-a-vis the elements. But no matter how bad things were there would be nothing to say. I know you couldn't talk if you didn't have an intellect. Surely you know I'm the one that pointed out to you. But even if that, not notwithstanding, there just simply would be nothing to say. You would die sans complaint. Or even worse, probably some of us agree, you could go a long time without sex and never complain. There simply would be nothing to say even when things were not going swimmingly well for you. It's just the way it would be. There would be nothing to say. Now, if you get a glimpse of that, then go back or press on to what I just pointed out, that without the secondary world, you would have nothing to bitch about. Well, of course, more technically, gripe about. Then I ask you to consider, what does that say about all human complaints? Well, it's not just an out-of-hand dismissal of human complaints, because human complaints, by God, are important. We all know that. But what does that say about them? Of all forms. All forms. It's not conditional. All forms, from those that might be apparently easy to poke a bit of fun at, or at which to poke a bit of fun, are those that would appear to be more seriously serious. If the tongue can talk about the complaint, what's the basis of the complaint? The basis of the complaint, in a sense, is a temporary, a partial death of the processes of life. It is to take the primary world and to cut off another piece of it for a second, as you're supposed to. But if you take that as being the full statement of what's possible, then of course that's all that's possible. But you're cutting off a piece of reality again, and you're sticking a pin in it. Every complaint you make, every prejudicial statement you make, every provincial idea you accept as being, yeah. Any local presentation of what reality is, what the truth is, what anything is a piece of death. It's an episodic death. It is a transfer of energy, but it stops any attempt that you may have thought you had as to making radical inquiries, because there's no longer an inquiry. You're no longer watching a butterfly flutter by. You're now, rat brain that you are, you're now attempting, I don't even want to say it, but to do those kinds of things to the butterfly. You're attempting to put it into a case. You're attempting to kill it and stick it on a board and say, well, now I've got it. If that's having it, then, again, I must point the possibility that this kind of stuff is far beyond a waste of time. It's not even in the dictionary. Because everything that humanity has ever thought, going right back to the Sumerians and everyone making little scratches in the sands and making little notes and saying, we decided that God is a tree. Or we decided that goodness is better than badness. Whatever it was that they thought and said, as far back as you can even find in your own nervous system, if not history books, that was it. Everything since then has been spinning your wheels. Everything since then has been busy work. That the truth was there. As life has things wired up to believe, it continues that the original diet, the water diet, was it. We keep renaming it a little bit. Life sticks somebody else's name on it, or they say we see the folly, not the folly. We see the shortcomings of Dr. X's water diet 10 years ago. Of course, water diet, religion, Christianity, anything, the Marxist philosophy. We see the shortcoming because he told you, the original water diet, or the last one, that you had to drink 12 glasses of water a day. Close, but no cigar because you've got to drink 14. You know, well, let me write that down. You have gone from orthodoxy to liberal. You've gone from paleo to neo. You have come up to date. And all it is a continual renaming. For the sake of clarity, I must point out, of course, that that's not all it is. Sick, that's not all it is. But we don't have time to keep on shaving it all down, do we? You people are supposed to know, as it goes around, it's not just a merry-go-round. It's a merry-go-round on a worm screw, not just in one direction. But at any rate, it is a kind of continual renaming of the water diet. It is not life driving men to ask serious, hard questions. It's not. It is a renaming of the same things over and over and over. And by the renaming, it apparently has at least in some unanalyzed way, presented an episodic response. As it's taken as an answer. That, wait a minute. Now, everybody was very concerned about life. And I know that many of you got caught up into Dr. Stillman's or Dr. X's water diet. And I know that many of you did not, as it turned out, receive the full benefit that you imagined you would. The crowd goes, yeah. They're collectively talking about what kind of guys they are. That we all tried it, and it seemed to help for a while, but then something happened, right? Yeah. What kind? All right. The thing is, the dear man was close. He said 12 glasses of water a day. It's 14. And everybody, It now seems like all you've done is rename it. It's the neo water diet, or whatever they want to call it. But by renaming it, it now appears to be an answer. Do you see? And all it is a renaming. And then after that goes for a while, that somebody comes back and says, wait a minute. It was not. How many of you have been disappointed? How many of you have drifted away from the mother church, from the mother water diet? And many of you say, well, we have. And you say, well, the thing is, we went up to the 14 glasses of water a day. Now, do we ever? And so, all right, the point is, we now realize we've really discussed this during our last conclave, or the God spoke to us, or something happened. And now we understand that wasn't necessary. 5 glasses of water a day. And the apparent renaming, or the renaming, has become now an apparent answer. The idea is repopularized. But it is not an additional inquiry into what's going on. It is not radical questioning. It is a renaming of what's already been asked. Life is not wired up through man to provide the need, the desire, much less any sort of means or vehicle to ask such questions. Which leaves us with one question. Why is that clock running backwards? Oh. I had my contacts in backwards. So we're getting contacts. Would that work? Would time run backwards if you put them in backwards? I guess we've killed enough time. There's only 30 seconds left. Instead of me saying something else clever, and we just stare at the clock? No. Or how about if I wait until just the last 5 seconds and then try and say something pithy? For you censors out there on cable, that's Pithy.